Hello. Beautiful. All right. So that's the test of seeing if the mic's working, which is fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Lovely to see that Wellington has definitely turned on its most beautiful weather for us, as always. I've definitely missed the lovely sunshine that I always get when I come to Wellington. But yeah, so I think for us, it's really exciting to be here. I'm definitely a Kiwi, and being back home after 3 years is a very lovely thing. So I'm going to have a great weekend with my family, which is really exciting. But yeah, so we are going to have just a nice casual panel for you today. We're going to talk about some do's and don'ts of the game dev scene and kind of some experiences that we've had. So we're going to have some anti-quotes that we're just going to talk through. And then we're going to talk about empowerment, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. And yeah, so before we start the chat, Ubisoft, big brand, there's definitely titles we cannot talk about, so please don't ask us anything about current games or anything. We unfortunately can't give you any interesting behind the scenes views of that. But yeah, so hopefully you enjoy it. I guess I'll do a quick round of intros as well. So I'm Ash, I'm a producer at Ubisoft in Australia, and this is Pat Nolan, so he's our game designer, and then we've got Nick Strine, who's our UX lead in Ubisoft. So at the moment, we're working on X-Defiant, which is a free-to-play shooter. We're working with our lovely co-dev studio in San Francisco, and so that's a little bit about what we do day to day. But yeah, I guess we can kind of get kick-started and jump right in. So the first kind of section, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about some do's and don'ts. So we'll go through the quotes. We're going to go through power of empowerment, and then some diversity and inclusion topics. Great word of warning, we love to talk, so we may or may not get to all of these topics. We're also going to try and get through these as much as possible while giving you some time at the end to have any questions that you want to ask us as well. But we'll jump right in. So the lovely game dev do's and don'ts, as you guys would be very excited about. So the first thing that we're going to kind of jump into is we need to build a game before we understand its potential. So I'm going to pass it over to Pat. This is a very fun topic for you to kind of start us off with.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really interesting quote, and I've heard it through, not just certain types of people in the game industry. I've heard it from multiple different roles and all across that. I don't think it's I think there's a bit of truth here, right? It's not something that's necessarily like, that I jump in and be like, no, that's completely wrong. We should never do this, right? So just trying to break it down into like two parts to try to understand here for me. I'd start with like, we need to build the game before we can understand it, right? And to kind of go into that.
Just before you
sure.
launch into it, if it's cool, when you say potential, what more specifically, because there's a host of different sort of areas of potential you might, depending on what you do, you might see potential in a game and it's, it's marketability or monetization. You might
or
see
fun
potential in the IP or
give a whole
fun,
talk on that.
Right?
Yes.
So when talking about like potential,
what would that mean?
what is it? What are you looking for in potential in a game?
Yeah. I think for potential for me, immediately it's kind of like what our players kind of expect from the game, how it's going to really hit the mark for them. And then I think the other one that we talk about quite a lot, but is a bit understated at times, is like, what is the potential for our stakeholders, or my boss, or like investors in the industry?
Depending on your job, the potential you're looking for in a future game would change, right?
Yeah, and you'd think that they're always kind of like perfectly aligned because they want to sell the game to players or something like that, but it's not necessarily 100% the same, right? Because it's all kind of people's own interpretations of what they find valuable.
So as a game designer, what's the potential you're looking at? You just touched on it around what players' expectations are.
Yeah, well, I guess it's different from game to game, and I think this is kind of what I'm trying to get at here, which is like, for each game and each studio, how do they kind of like understand that potential, not just through building it, but through different kind of things, designing it, researching, testing, trying to go in and build that kind of tailored approach to understanding the potential in the game. So to answer your question, I guess, yeah, for players, we'd be looking at a host of different things, right? I mean, if we're just talking about pure practices, we could, for example, we could define types of players. We could call it, I could call it Nick. I'd be like, what does Nick like in the game, and what does he even do from a day to day? That means that he wants to come home and sink 8 hours overnight into my my new MMO,
Quite possibly.
Theoretically, hypothetically, or does he just want to get like, I'm so tired, I just want to go home and play for like 20 minutes, then I'm out. For example, this is just like one of the types of things that we'd be thinking about.
That'll help kind of guide into what you're building as well, right? So as soon as you start understanding what your player demographic is, you're going to start defining what's your MVP, what is fun, which again is a very big conversation to jump into, but it's finding those balances between those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think by that quote, there was a propensity to perhaps rush into prototyping too quickly? Is that are there times where that might be more applicable than others? Why would it be important, in other words, for us to be able to dictate what the potential of a game is prior to prototype or building, going too far down the build line?
Yeah. I guess, understanding the type of game that you're developing, you could kind of build the idea. You quickly kind of come to the sort of the shared understanding if you're trying to like model, how are we going to best, understand the questions about a game, like, is this going to be fun or something like that. You might jump and be like, okay, well, we need to prototype like this piece. This piece is kind of relatively safe, and we kind of understand that, for our different dives into looking at different games and the market and all those kind of things. But I think a lot of studios, like, not even just for prototyping, but for design is a great example, a while ago, like the norm was to kind of sit down and write like a 250-page design document before you start coding, and like that might sound archaic, but I guess it was like the strength of that studio at the time, and also the kind of the shared understanding between people of just like, oh, well, this is kind of the way that we do it, right? But I feel like a way that could help kind of speed along answering those questions is to, before you just kind of jump into going, okay, we're just going to go in and kind of understand that straight away, whether it's through prototyping or design, is to kind of be like, what's the best way that we could answer those questions and feel safe that we can, okay, let's start building the game.
Yeah.
So personally, how have you find that? So I know from the work that we've done so far, we tend to do a really nice breakdown of the design and then kind of go through, right, we're going to tackle this slice, and then we use that to find the fun value. What do we need to tweak? What do we need to balance? What would you say compared to like the games that, or when people go, right, we don't know what we're building, we're going to jump and we just have to build it and then build the fun out of it. How would you persuade them otherwise? Like, what's the benefits of breaking into slices for your design?
I feel like immediately, like a big part to me that would guide me into saying like, okay, I need to sit down with Ash and try to, guide the development a certain way or another, whether it's prototyping or design. First thing for me that jumps to my mind is we got to look at the requirements, right? Like for the project. For example, like if you're developing a game and you've got a very short time to where you've got to effectively release it or deliver it to someone to prove that, hey, we can go forward with this game and greenlight it, right? You might be like, well, we have to simultaneously be designing and prototyping and doing all these things and iterate really, really fast, as opposed to say like if we have like the plan or the time to be able to do a certain like a different kind of approach. I think those kind of requirements could potentially guide some of that practice.
Yeah, I think there's another element which I've noticed a lot through the scene is that people jump in sometimes without designs in mind or that slice in mind, and a lot of it's, hey, there's a huge risk, we don't know how to tackle it, so the only way that we can solve this situation is just by doing. And so I guess personally, from what we've experienced going through a whole lot of features we've worked on, is being able to define out like what is the risk and what's the mitigations to that. So like instead of just going in blindly, what will we take risk on? What's like a medium risk? And then clarify like, all right, what's some of the strategies we can do? We don't know how to tackle it. That's a whole nother conversation. So then at that point you time box it and you start thinking, right, we're gonna set this time. If we don't hit this solution by X date, then you go back, you redesign or you rethink what you wanted to do because it's not potentially gonna be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, depending on the size of the organization, there's also stakeholder management as well, right? That's a big one that, obviously as you get to a bigger company, you have more stakeholders that aren't involved in the process from top down, as it just couldn't be. So they kind of periodically need to see progress, right? So what's interesting is that some of the methodologies that you've been using to kind of prove out the potential of a game that we've seen in the past could easily transfer to those stakeholders, right? It becomes a communication document to validate or rationalize a potential risk as much as possible without the expense of prototyping too early.
Yeah, I think I'm just sparking this kind of, if I had to call out like a specific practice to try to be like, okay, we're going to meet the expectations of our players and our stakeholders, is just to literally define that concretely, like what the goal is for the player, what the goal is also for, I guess, the product or, your stakeholder, your investor, your boss. And you can do that. You don't have to do that just at like purely the full game level. Like, when we release this whole game, we're going to hit this, full milestone goal. We can do that at like the release level, like the feature level. Like if you're developing a new mode for your game or something, you can be like, okay, what is the player experience goal for like this mode, focusing on this type of player. And then we can also look at our stakeholders and be like, what do they want? Well, we want them, Nick's come in and told me that, he wants our players to come back to this mode, once a week because it will boost our retention. And then we got to think like, oh, okay, so don't want them to come back every day, And so like this kind of thing means that you're gonna hit the mark on all fronts, ideally. And having that defined ahead of time can be just so critical to be like, okay, now that we've defined that goal, what kind of mode am I gonna make? I'm not just gonna make something that I think is really awesome and focus on what I like. I'm gonna focus on the people who are gonna go out and buy the game, right?
Yeah.
So would you say the takeaway for this is to kind of challenge any process that is simply there because that's the way it's always been done?
Yeah, and also like just I think just a constant evaluation of not only just what your studio is doing or your company, but also yourself and kind of the way that you approach games. I can tell you from like working at different studios to try to tie this up a little bit. I've had to I've been like, this is the best way to do it, and then I've changed games, and it's just like, well, it just kind of makes sense that I do things a bit differently now because I don't know, like it's different people.
We should be evolving constantly, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of ties in nicely to the next section, which is the company culture isn't important to making games. So the amounts of time I have heard this very lovely quote from various people is interesting. So I kind of wanted to go into like firstly, what's the benefits of having good culture in a studio and what defines that culture?
Yeah, is it true, right? I think the word important, if I'm to kind of like dissect that, the word important is what makes it, for me, a dangerous quote, right? Because technically, you don't need culture to make any software product or any product, for what's sake, right? The way I kind of see this is you can focus on winning the game or you can focus on winning the season. And quite often not, if you're building a studio or a company, you want to have at least a long-term view or a long-term strategy. Negating culture development early on, or at any stage really, is also negating the long-term play. There are times where you panic and you just kind of cut process and you do things ad hoc to get something across the line, right? That does tend to happen. But if you're focusing on the longevity of a studio and a company and the health of it, then you are going to absolutely want to put culture first.
Yeah.
It opens up a new topic of what culture is. To again just dissect this. What do we mean by culture in a company? It's almost this untangible kind of.
It's not the words written on the wall, right? It's not your vision statement. It's not the colors.
Certainly not your vision statement. No.
You can have whatever you want on your studio walls. That doesn't mean that's your culture. And so it's figuring out how do you define that? How do you live that and get your teams to live it?
The best kind of concept I've heard around culture is that it's the kind of the glue that holds the day-to-day operations together. It's everything in between your day-to-day operations. You can think of after-work drinks on Friday as being culture. It's kind of, but it's not really, right? For me, culture is kind of, at any given opportunity, you have a number of potential ways of doing something. And to have a common understanding of how you do those things and a reason behind it is really where the culture is. So in my view, when you complete a piece of work that you then need to hand over to someone, it might be a relatively small piece of work, there are any number of ways you can do that. You can pop it into a Teams chat, you can send it an email, you can tell someone else to transfer it, you can tell their manager, you can go direct to the person and have a conversation and be verbal and answer questions as you go. For me, that all of those can be done, but one of them is far more personable and it takes the other person into account and allows that person to quiz you on why you've made your own decision. So you're opening yourself up for the feedback of communication. For me, that's a better idea as to what culture is in a workplace than Friday night drinks.
So I guess, Pat, this is kind of aimed towards you, but I know a lot of what we've done in our team is take a really strong view on how are we helping develop culture and personalities and the work we do as well. What would you say is the key things to be able to build between people versus like putting people out? How do you encourage the culture that you want?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it ties back to kind of what Nick was saying about building that shared understanding between each other. And for me, like if I was to go and try to do that and try to put it into a single word, for me it's like building empathy between the people that you work with, trying to think about how do I understand why Nick did something, or how can I like open myself up in that same way to sort of receive feedback and specifically around feedback, right? I think we went through so much like in our time like together with feedback training of being able to like open yourself up and be like, what do you think about what I did, and not in the same way that I'm just like looking for praise, right? Although that would be really nice. But
that touches on again another larger subject, right? It's that the culture, when done correctly, can feed into a product as well, right? It's a character. It's a kind of character in the company, and if done well, it results in the character of a particular product, which is almost especially important in games, right?
Super important.
I'm going to steer away from the branding kind of side of things and think more about the character of a game. It's your sort of point of difference, your main point of difference against a marketplace crammed full of other games that are doing similar things and probably free. So the idea of culture being important to making a game, I think it's important to any product, but more importantly, I think it's important to the success of a company on a long run, especially when you're constantly fighting for talent, right?
Exactly.
You're out there trying to get the best talent and secure them. It's no longer good enough to just acquire talent and then again negate them. You have to facilitate their well-being. You have to make it a place that they want to stay at, because nothing's more costly than getting halfway through a piece of work and having someone key to the project leave because they were unhappy. That's actually one of the worst outcomes, and we've all seen that happen.
Yes.
And it's not fun at all. interesting to see who here has seen that happen. Who has been on a project and lost a key part of it? Yeah, plenty of hands. So culture for me is something that I've always focused on when moving to a company. It's extremely important to me, and that comes from years of experience and realizing that your job isn't just about the work. It's about the relationships that you build along the way, the people that you meet, the networking that happens. The quality of your work is certainly important, and I would absolutely implore you to continue pushing your skills to that degree, but it's not the be-all, end-all of what your career actually is about. You'll find that over time your career ends up being about the people that you work with in those connections, in those relationships.
So I think something that ties in really nicely is the next topic that we had as well, which is around, as we're building the studio culture, as you build what that kind of vision is, there's this lovely quote that we've got, which is, "I don't have time to train people," which I'm sure many of you would have heard. There may be people that have said it.
I've heard this when I've been in
exactly.
That position.
Right? So I guess personally, I know we're going through a whole lot of, building of a team and being able to look at right, what are the roles? What do we need to build out here? And what happens? And I think, Pat, you have a really good example of this. What happens if you don't have that person to be there to train people as well? Which is something we can, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's probably, plenty of people here as well. I'd be interested in seeing if you've ever been in a role where you haven't had a lead there or someone there to train you, and you've just been what do you do now? Does anyone want to put their hands up?
In other words,
I'll put my hand up.
If you're still building your experience, been put into a role at that higher level.
Yeah, there's plenty of times where you won't have a mentor there or someone to guide you. And I've been in this scenario in a team, say, and it sounds like a bit of a Tony Robbins motivational speech. So you just have to empower yourself or something like that, and train yourself and that kind of thing. But you'd be surprised how many people kind of just give up or sit on their hands,
Well, or the counter, which is that in a bit of overconfidence, one might assume that they kind of reach the pinnacle of their skill set and have nothing left to learn.
True.
Before being able to. Personally, I don't think anyone should be able to kind of get to that point in their skill. You should always find something new to expand into, or an insight on what you do that expands or broadens your horizons.
Yeah.
A perfect example for me would be our relationship, right? Because you're coming from a UX background, I'm coming from a traditional game design background, but they just interact so much. There's different fields and cross over into each other where I'll be working on a gameplay section and Nick will just come in and just blow it wide up, and it's just did you think about all these different ways of perceiving this? And you can also find this with not just within your field, your design field. Some of the best solutions that I've got that I never would have thought of at the time become from other engineers in my team on a game design thing, just because they think about things differently, right?
And that's getting influence from other people. Just to go back to not having time to train new people. I know I've been in that situation plenty of times. It's unavoidable, right? And if you have X amount of work that's handed to you and you have X amount of time to get that done, bringing someone on is going to cost you more time to teach them how to do it than you have time to actually complete the task. So how do you deal with that? Again, this kind of cycles back around to a lot of what we're getting at here, is that needs to be something that's facilitated by your upper management and inherent in the culture of the company, is that constantly grabbing for expensive talent and hiring them is always going to be something that companies do, right? But investing in it is an investment. When you invest in your younger, newer people and build those skill sets, some might say, what happens when they leave, right? But you could easily say, what happens if you don't skill them up, right? You end up having a liability and someone that's ultimately unhappy and then overworked talent. So again, thinking about the long-term view, what I found is it works best, and Ash has done this on quite a few occasions. It's just slowly built, taken certain menial tasks that are relatively an opportunity for a younger engineer or designer to approach. And then factor in a little bit of extra buffer time into that project line so that they can spend that extra time doing it. That takes a lot of the pressure off, their lead or their immediate mentor to be hands-on all day, every day, showing them how to complete tasks. It gives them the opportunity to learn for themselves and field questions every now and then. Yeah. So it has to be built into the larger system. It can't be up to, in the case where I was asked to skill up people without the time to do it. It can't be up to the person or the lead that has other work to do. It has to be up to the management and the production managers and the company as a whole to decide that's what you're going to do.
It's a very low-cost way of doing it, right? You don't want your experienced leads to be working on these very low-end bugs that they probably will not get tackled anytime soon when you want to release a game. So being able to kind of spread that out, share that, and then know that there's some elements that maybe will be a nice addition to your game is being tackled, and then the requests to your lead's going to be low, but they're getting an engine, they're getting exposure to some of those things, and knowing who to talk to, I think is a really big one. Yeah. I guess the one thing, kind of like how it started out, is what happens if you don't have that lead? What if you don't have a specific role in your studio? I guess, Pat, we're going through this with one of our tech designers. How did you find the ability to give her what she needed in order to be able to be trained in the right way? Yeah,
it's a good question. Yeah, so at the moment, for those who don't know here, I have a tech designer on my team. I'm not a tech designer. Just a quick, I'm sure many people understand tech design, but also just to throw it out there, it's more of like a hands-on role, at least in our studio. Working deep in the engine, and I'm one of those mystical game designers who don't do a lot of deep, engine work going in there, going into the logic systems and something like Unreal potentially, or any other kind of system. So it's just like, how would I kind of help mentor or train a person who's like not necessarily just a game designer, right? Yeah. But I think that immediately if we just said I couldn't, it kind of dismisses the idea that someone like in a different role than me can learn from anyone who's just outside of their role. Like they're never going to learn from like an engineer. But I think that like a lot of the best kind of learnings for people can come just from like participating in valuable work with people across different disciplines. Like the amount of stuff that I've learned from people outside of my own discipline has been huge, and the people who have the capacity to like mentor and guide and teach people who are just starting out is always there, in a way.
Yeah, it's bang on, right? Is that when you have talented, skillful people who are passionate about what they do, and these are the people that we're hiring, right? Because they'll grow and learn and enjoy what they do and become the future sort of leads and managers. From my experience, those people will go out and do the tutorials on their own time. They'll continue pushing their own skills at home, in their spare time, at lunch. So that's what they do. They're passionate about it. So the most important learning experience is the hands-off approach to say, here's a task, figure out how to do it, right? That's the place that they seem to learn the most valuable lessons about what they do. We know that, for example, Simone will eventually get into a capable engineering place where we can let her autonomously. She's pretty much already there, right? So what is more important is understanding all those nuances of the workplace that people don't know about until they join a workplace.
And I think this, again, being the clicker of PowerPoint, does lead us into the power of empowerment, which is kind of what stems from this conversation, right? It's giving our staff, giving our team members the ability to feel empowered, to feel like they can take action and they have guidance and direction. Something that I want to throw to you guys is what are other ways that we can encourage, that we can empower team members?
Well, before we do that, can we clarify, one, what do you mean by empowerment, the different types of empowerment, and why that's even important in a workplace, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different avenues, and I think empowerment means different things to different people. For myself, I think that self-empowerment is really key. Feeling like I have the ability to speak up, to be able to take action on things, and to be able to lead where I believe we need to make certain decisions. So that to me is a very big element to it. How you get there, I think, is building confidence in yourself and finding people along the way that can help you on that journey. So finding a good mentor, finding people that are there to support you, finding allies essentially. But then I'm sure like empowerment to you, Pat, is going to be something completely different, right?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's like, I've been in, again, I think touching on an earlier point that I said, scenarios where it's just like, you just kind of feel like you're a bit lost or disempowered. And, for me, without any guidance, it's necessarily like, I think, you said it pretty eloquently, is like having that kind of self-confidence that it's effectively like a solvable problem, right? And that you're not necessarily purely just on your own. Like you can find people who are probably in the same scenario as you, share the grief or whatever. But I think having, I've been able to find someone who's just kind of been like my buddy and can kind of like not necessarily guide me, but be like on my team to like this one, to keep going towards where I want to go.
So support networks.
Yeah.
I think for me, empowerment is more about removing me personally. Empowering myself would be understanding and removing blockages that are preventing me from getting or achieving whatever it is that I've decided I want to achieve.
So what's an example of that?
The example of that would be, let's see, I'll steer away from any.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically,
yes.
Quite often or not, okay, so for what I do in terms of UX, UI design, there is always this beautiful idea sitting there that comes too late, right? We've moved along, we've got this idea, it solves a lot of problems, it's way better than what we have. It might be my strong belief that this is worth pursuing, but time restraints, resources, technical limitations, there may be a number of things that make this challenging or even risky, right? Empowerment for me would be finding out how and who I need to speak to start reducing the amount of risk involved in making a late implementation, or evolving a piece of work, or adding that creative idea that you think is worthy of it. So that's kind of what I mean by removing barriers. It would be finding out who I need to speak to and how to speak to them, and what each of their personalities might be like, what they're again, going back to what you said earlier, empathizing, right? You can't ever come in and just steamroll people. You need to view their problem or their hesitation on making a change in a realistic light, right? Because they have their experience and they know what they're doing, and they have deeper insight than I do. So empowerment is gaining the right information on how to kind of get to the result that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think something that we've been noticing and that we've been trying to build even in our team, which leads from the previous point of training new people, I think something that we've put a lot of attention to is making new starters, making juniors feel empowered. So we want them to have conversations with stakeholders. We want them to reach out to our co-dev studios. So like Ubisoft being a lovely, huge studio and company, like we're working with San Francisco, with Annecy, with Osaka, and so at that point you want them to start building those connections and feeling like they can ask questions, they can talk to these people, and it kind of like, it's all of these things magically getting together, forming one, you said it really well, it's forming the glue that is essentially building your team and putting this culture together of people feeling empowered. Also the empowerment of taking risks, like how do we take risks? Do we allow juniors to take risks, fail, learn from them? I think that's a really big thing that
and I've so often heard people say, oh, it's okay to make mistakes here, but then the response when that actually occurs is very different. So probably, if you sorry, just wigged my microphone out there, got a bit excited. If you think of empowerment or the facilitation of empowerment as a cultural aspect to your day-to-day operation, it works really nicely.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
I was just kind of interested in what you said about like failing, right? I feel like to me, what just jumped to my mind is just like, I feel like a lot of people would feel empowered to go out and, do their best work if they felt that they could fail and not have, the weight of the world come crashing down on their head, that they could learn from it, because that's the only way that we're going to learn, right, is to make a mistake.
Absolutely.
It's like a fundamental thing.
I don't think anyone would deny that here. I think that's relatively common information.
How do you put that into practice?
How do you put that in? That's what I find really interesting. And going back to the leadership of any organization needs to exemplify what others are to do, or what our company is about. It's not good enough to kind of just document it and say, these are the values that we live by, and put it on a wall and then forget about it. Someone needs to be doing these things and exemplifying it for others, because that's quite literally what leadership is. It's being the first to just go ahead and do it. You're putting yourself at risk for the betterment of your team or your company.
Exactly.
So if at any opportunity, that's how you need to, that's where you would find the beginnings of a healthy culture, is catch yourself in the moment, working through a mistake or a problem that somebody has caused through negligence, inexperience, whatever the reason might be, and the way that you manage that in full view of the person, the recipient, or even the rest of the team, is effectively how others are going to perceive the company culture.
Yeah. So that brings us to the next slide, which is my personal favorite, the diversity and inclusion piece. And I think it ties in really nicely with, again, the how do you set up that culture, how do you set up that environment that fosters, I guess, a good working relationship for all of your team members, and then also, and a result, also what you kind of have as an output for your game. For me, I feel like the diversity part's been really important, especially because I look at this lovely crowd of people. I wish that one day we'll see a much more diverse group, because it ends up leading into more unique game designs, more narrative. It's going to allow our players to have moments to connect with people. But I think leading from the empowering people part, being able to have diverse team members and have them feel like they're empowered to step in is a really big part. A lot of companies are going out and saying, we need diverse people. Like, we know this is important. We've got like a bunch of middle-aged white guys working in our team. We want to change that. And then they go and mass hire a whole lot of diverse people. Fantastic. How do you support those people? How do you support and make sure that you've got an environment that includes them, an environment where they feel safe and they feel empowered, so that they can speak up? So you're in a room, we've got this fantastic, or there's this design that's being discussed, but someone from a diverse culture or a different kind of environment comes in and they say, I'm not happy with this. This doesn't this doesn't kind of sit right with me. And when we release this to players, I know this is the impact they're going to have. It's making sure they feel comfortable and confident that they can actually have that conversation and be able to say it. So that's something that's really, really big to me.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of diversity, again, we always get to this question, is it important, right? Like the real questions, like diversity is this hot topic and everyone wants this, why is this suddenly important, right? Historically, we know why it's important, but there's also real advantages to it, right? What I find most advantageous about diversity on its own is just it also means diversity of thought and diversity of perspective and just general those are elements that play a huge role in creative, right? It's like those great creative ideas are the ones you just didn't see coming. It's like my mind wasn't even there, and that's often facilitated by different perspectives that have from people that come from different viewpoints. So diversity in that sense is super important to me. Furthering into inclusion, that's a huge one, right? Every company I've been in, I have talked to people who have felt not included in something. It's usually people that are, further down. The transmission of information from the top down is poor, and they show up to work every day and feel lost in a mix of people that are doing important things, and they're working on these smaller tasks. So
I think it's also important about growing the leadership group as well. It's something that I mean, within games, within other industries that I've worked in, you see people getting excited about diversity, wanting to bring people in, but your management layers, your leads, your people managers, your HR team, they aren't diverse people at all. And so it's how do you foster that? How do you make people feel comfortable? And I think a lot of what personally I know we've been trying to tackle is doing that. And so trying to find managers, trying to find leads of a diverse nature is difficult. It's hard. And so I think something we found really valuable, if I am to share some lovely knowledge, is just looking at what are other industries that you can find those skills. Can you sacrifice certain skills for some other soft skills they have? Do they have to have specific game experience? And I think that's something we found really valuable, is finding those other markets where we can bring people and give them exposure and kind of have that grow into our leadership group and being able to facilitate a much better diverse team. And that even kind of goes down to how we're hiring. We're looking for juniors if we have to.
How do you do
and
it?
train them up, give them the opportunity to grow into these lead roles so that they can eventually, as we become larger team members, they can help foster some of that relationship.
Yeah, there's got to be an effort made, basically. We found very quickly when, through hiring and with a specific focus on making sure that we had a good selection of people to choose from. The ultimate decision is the best person for the job. We're never going to hire just for diversity's sake, and I think that's really important. But the effort to find a diverse group of people to choose from, people don't often go down that route. They limit themselves to putting a job ad out and then sitting and waiting for who responds. What we've found works a lot better is to actually actively go out and talk to people and present them with what we're thinking and gauge their response. Going back to the idea of this talent pool sitting outside of games, game methodology has become far more widespread than it was 5 to 10 years ago even. Even when I was sort of in the transitional point of advertising to tech, most advertising agencies were fixated on gamification of activations. You're going to put an experience out there that's going to promote something for people, you gamify it, it hooks them in, right? Instant little retention clause. So there's a growing mentality of how games work, what's involved in it, the industry itself. Playing games, far more people are playing games than ever before. The talent pool is expanding. You just need to actually look in other avenues, in other places.
One of my favorite designers that I've worked with,
he came from an international relations degree straight into game design. He'd never had any software engineering development experience, but when he kind of came in to do that internship, like we were able to understand that this person was kind of cut out to be, a game designer at the time, and that person's gone on to do great things for different games. I think it's important that you sort of understand the value of bringing in diverse people, whether it's their background or different types of walks of life, and understand, especially in the creative field, as you said, it's like you get different mindsets and to solve a problem. You get different perspectives and inspiration in the creative field. And then, once that person is in there, is to sort of display that value to them, allow them to come at you with a different perspective, disagree with you, and understand that ultimately we all share the same, the value of building a great game and having players just experience joy. We all want the same thing, and having those different people in there can just, multiply that factor, right?
So I think kind of at the end, looping back to this, it's not just going to happen. You need to take an active approach to be able to get diverse, inclusive cultures going. Great ways of doing it, as we've talked about, is really just taking the time. It's going to take time, but it's going to pay off in the long run for us. It's been a really long process in terms of trying to get diverse talent, but we're doing really well with our team. We've got about an over 40% rate of gender diversity in our team, as well as a bunch of different cultures and ethnicities in our team that's building X-Defiant, which is really exciting. So I think it's just about staying true to what you're focused on. There'll be times where it slows down and you think, there's these people sitting out there, they've got fantastic experience, but do you want to sacrifice that versus taking the time and risking waiting for someone else to give them an opportunity rather than taking the experience that's already there?
Sorry.
And I'm going to stop us there because we have run out of time, and I know that there may be questions, so we thought we would open it to the floor and see if there are any questions. Hi, I think they're going to bring a mic around somewhere. They're just, one moment, please.
They're testing the mic.
They're just testing the mic. And it's not a game dev conference if some piece of technology isn't working, as we would imagine.
Unfortunately, it's 9:50, so the next talk is in 10 minutes, so there's no time for Q&A.
Sorry, guys.
Come up and talk to us.
Well,
We're happy to answer questions in person.
So as you can see, we love to talk. If there's any questions you did have that you would like to ask us, we'll just be outside and you can grab us and we can have a chat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Guys.